Hello and welcome back to the Middling Along podcast. I'm your host, Emma Thomas, founder of Managing the Menopause and executive coach at the Triple Shift. My guest today is Lucy Melville. Lucy is a widow, a mother of 3 young people. Her husband died of stage 4 lung cancer in July 2023, just 6 weeks after diagnosis, whilst her youngest was still at school. They were married for 26 years. Just 1 year after losing her husband, Brian, Lucy was unexpectedly terminated from a senior role with the international academic publishing company she'd been working at for the last 14 years. She's reinvented herself after a bruising and isolating period when her kids all left home, she was on garden leave, going through perimenopause and dealing with her father also being terminally ill. She found new business partners who wanted to invest in her, and together they have launched Riverlight Press at the end of 2024. A new company and a new direction has given Lucy the validation she mistakenly looked for elsewhere, and she has come to know that joy and hope and purpose has to come from within. Welcome to the podcast, Lucy.
Thank you very much, Emma, and it's lovely to be with you.
Now we have had a separate chat before recording this today, and I appreciate that possibly for some people listening, this might be a bit of a hard listen if they've experienced, certainly if they've experienced bereavement recently. So all I would say is if you're listening and you're feeling that might apply to you, go gently, and if you need to come back and listen to this another time, then we perfectly well understand that. And Lucy, thank you for wanting to so generously share your own story and what's happened. So take us back to what the beginning of what I know Eleanor Mills so graciously calls the midlife clusterfuck. What
Absolutely. Yes. So, look, here I am facing, as we all are, these changes in our life, and I'm facing them after a long and mostly very happy marriage. We had just celebrated the summer before our 25th wedding anniversary. We'd had a wedding blessing in our local church. We didn't get married in church, so I thought this would be quite nice actually. I got to walk down the aisle and have all that stuff going on that I didn't have in the register office before. And it felt like this is good. We've been married
Mm.
a long time. We've had our ups and downs. Sometimes, like we all do, I've had my doubts, but we've made it. The kids will leave home soon. I'll face empty nesting, but I'm not terrified. I've got a great partner by my side. I've got a job I've been well rewarded for and recognized as being really good at. Life is okay. And that was in the August before Brian was diagnosed in May the following year. So in May 2023, he felt slightly unwell. And I went out with my girlfriends for a night at the theatre. And I can remember the night before his diagnosis, sitting in the foyer of the theatre, complaining about my fella and his man flu and being a bit sort of, dismissive and like
Mm.
rolling my eyes and all that kind of stuff. And the next day, he went and had some blood tests. And of course, they must have come back with all sorts of elevations in them and spikes. And we were in the system very quickly. But within a couple of days, I think it was May the 12th, 2023, I worked and I dropped him off at the local hospital to have some further examinations. He said, "Don't stay. I'll be absolutely fine, but come and pick me up when I'm through." So I was kind of preparing to go and collect him from the hospital when my phone rang and he said, "Where are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm just finishing off, Brian. I'm just about to leave. I should be with you in 10 minutes. Please come now." I said, "What's the matter? What's happened? Lucy, please just come." And I said, "Oh my God, have they told you something?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, Brian, you need to tell me. You can't just say that." And as I was going out to the car, I sort of put my phone on the seat and started the engine and started driving in traffic to get to him. His voice sounded so small and so far away. And he just said, "It's as bad as it can possibly be." And so I remember driving into the hospital, and I must have been speaking out loud, saying, "It's okay. It's going to be really hard. It's going to be tough, but you'll do this. It's okay. It's going to be really hard. It's going to be tough, but you can do this." Because I was still saying it when I arrived at the ward. And I remember all the nursing staff sort of turning to look at me,
Mm.
showing me the room he was in, and he was sat on a bed, and he actually did look really small at that point. He was a 6 foot tall man, but he looked so tiny. And then he told me, it's really bad. It spread from my, I've got cancer in my lung, but it spread to my liver, and they're saying it's not going to be curable. So at that moment, everything changes.
Mm.
Everything changes, and you go into protect and survive mode. Protect me, protect the kids, but look out for him. So that was the beginning of what turned out to be a very short journey for us, because 6 weeks later he died. And he actually died. Emma can see me because we've got our video cameras on, but I'm sitting in the room where he died,
Mhm.
and I'm sitting at his desk actually that he used to work in. I have a separate office in the garden, but I haven't been able to go and work in that office again. I've needed to be here at his desk, and I may continue that for a while, because this was the last place Brian was, and so I'm in his space, and I'm trying to kind of make his space resonate still through my life, even though he's not here.
6 weeks is such a short amount of time, isn't it, to come to terms with something like that? I suppose at the time you didn't know it was going to happen quite so quickly, or
No, we didn't. In fact, it's very difficult, understandably, for the diagnostics team to give a precise date. And initially, he'd been told it was probably a year. We were told it was probably a
mm,
year, and that he would start a program of chemotherapy with a combined treatment. But things, obviously, by that stage, by the time it was detected, this is the case with what I now understand is the possibly the worst form of cancer you can get. They outlined all the different types of cancer and said at the time this would be the worst, and it turned out to be this one. It's called stage 4 small cell carcinoma. And usually by the point that you feel symptoms, it's already metastasized, it's already spread. So in his case, a tumor that started in his lung wouldn't be the thing that killed him. It was the multiple tumors that formed in his liver, the secondaries, that actually caused his death. So initially, we were given a year, which was obviously hard enough to process. That was then, upon further tests, obviously a biopsy was performed on the liver tumors. That was then revised down to 3 months. And I remember that meeting happening at the local hospital in the oncology department, and sitting with his sister, who he was very close to, and having the consultant explain the re-prognosis. And I remember hearing this sound and thinking, God, somebody's wailing and screaming really loudly. And then the consultant said, Lucy, are you okay to continue? And I realized it was me.
oh
I
goodness.
really didn't have that sense that I made that noise. But then I turned to look at him, and I could see the sadness in his eyes. We had to wear masks because they were still, obviously it's an oncology ward, so they're
Mm.
still being very careful about infection. So I could just see his huge brown eyes above the mask, and I thought, my God, he is sitting there with such poise and dignity, whilst Claire and I are absolutely beside ourselves. I need to stop this now, because it's him that's being diagnosed with cancer, not me. So I pulled myself together quite quickly. So then we're facing 3 months. He then had his results looked at further. And in that very same session, the young consultant went out to talk to her senior, came back in and apologized profusely and said, I'm really sorry. We can't put you on the combined chemo because your creatine levels or something are so elevated, you wouldn't be able to tolerate. So we're going to
Mm.
have to give you just the single agent chemotherapy. They then explained this was much more um, likely to not result in much of a positive outcome. But they, nevertheless, they would do it. And subsequently, I found out that in patients like Brian, with such an advanced stage of this particular type of cancer, that would not have been offered in many local authorities at all. They simply would have put him straight onto palliative care. But they gave him this, I suppose, lifeline. But within a week of that meeting, the diagnosis had been he had to be hospitalized, and the diagnosis had then been revised down to we're now talking about days. So we'd gone from a year to 3 months to days in the course of less than 2 weeks. And at that point, we had to tell our children what was happening. And that, I think, was possibly the worst day of my
Mm.
life. I waited outside our house with my sister in law, Claire, who'd come down from Edinburgh. Brian was in hospital at that point, and we waited for my last child to walk back in from the bus stop. And I remember clearly watching her cross the road, opening the garden gate and turning to Claire and saying, we're about to turn their lives upside down. This is the moment. In this moment, they don't know. They know their dad is ill, but they don't know it's a terminal diagnosis. And we are about to go and sit down and tell them that their world is about to end. And that was an incredibly hard meeting. And I'm so grateful to Claire for sitting by my side and holding me during that time, because nobody wants to tell their children that their beloved father now is a matter of weeks, days away from death. And I'm sorry we didn't tell you before, but
Mm.
one of them was still studying for her A levels, well, doing her A levels actually. So we were trying to protect them, but we ran out of time. So we had to tell them.
Mm. It's hard to imagine how that, and obviously it impacts everybody differently, and
Yeah,
and that's their story. I don't want to
sure.
ask you to talk about that, but does it did it feel very surreal to you, the sort of suddenly being plunged into that scenario?
Yeah, and you know what? It's only now, sort of 18 months or so on from that point, that I realized just how surreal. Because when it's happening and it's happening live, you are in survival mode. And I remember during that period wondering why I wasn't reacting more. Why was I able to absorb all of this and remain relatively sound and stable? I was working all the way through. And I remember talking to my boss and colleagues and saying, I'm okay. I'm going to continue working. I will tell you when I'm not, but it has to be my terms. And that was respected, and that was, held by them. They said it's on your terms. But again, I know hindsight is a wonderful thing, but in hindsight, it probably wasn't the best thing for me to keep going, because my business, as was then in the company I was working for, was in crisis mode. And we were in hours long meetings, crisis contingency planning meetings, also still trying to do business as usual. And I threw myself with even more
Mm.
vigor, and I was always the company mantra was all in wherever we can. I was the living embodiment of that. I was completely all into that role, and I think I held on to the certainties of my work because everything else was so uncertain. And Brian was fully supportive of that. He ended up coming out of hospital and was discharged back home, having been catheterized and given various other meds. And the plan was that he would end his days in a local hospice. And I remember saying, how will I know when it's time?
Mm.
And they said, you'll know. You'll know. In the end, we didn't, because the last bit accelerated so fast, we didn't have time. But the work part of my life, I think, helped me to cope with the madness that was, going on around me, keeping my kids kind of on the straight and narrow. But the kind of toll of that is the bit we'll talk about, I guess, in a bit, when it all kind of catches up with me afterwards. At the time, I walked through this surreal journey feeling relatively calm, and I'm quite strong. I can do this. And I did do it. But, it does catch up with you eventually.
Mm. And obviously, losing somebody in that very traumatic fashion, you're having your world pulled out from beneath your feet. So for that to happen, and for then very soon afterwards for you to have the sort of the experience that you did with your job, you've just got this almost double bereavement happening.
Yeah.
I don't know how did that feel to kind of almost like you kind of like an aftershock from an earthquake. You've kind of
Mm.
got the original kind of event happening, and then you've got this secondary thing which is still earth shattering in its own way.
Absolutely. And I think that second event, the losing of my job, shook shook me to the core, because I had got through, I suppose you could say got through, I'd navigated my way through losing my partner of over a quarter of a century, the father of my kids, who had never attended a funeral until they attended their own father's funeral. And two of them were able to stand up in that church and do readings and speak about their dad, which was extraordinary. And I suppose for me, as a woman of a certain age, I was also navigating some big changes were going on for me hormonally. I was facing my children leaving home, which they all did last September. Suddenly, I'm on my own for the first time. I've never lived on my own, um, in an empty nest without the person I thought would be here to be in my nest with me, and without the job that had given me the structure and the meter of my life for 14 years. And very sadly, the person ultimately who made the decision, the owner and CEO of the company, had been a good friend. We'd been quite close, and I had worked in such a spirit of enterprise and goodwill and trust with him that it was, as I've been having some grief counseling, my counselor said, absolutely, as you've just described, Emma, was like another grief. I then
Mm,
had to absorb the grief of losing my identity within my professional self and feeling a betrayal, feeling I'd been let down by somebody who ultimately I had told him that I was very unhappy, which I was, of course. At the time, I was in mourning, I was in grief. I was very confused and quite angry sometimes, because grief does that. It's
mhm.
not linear, it takes you on such a weird journey. I was at a very critical business meeting just 6 weeks after my husband died, and having some fun with my colleagues in Amsterdam in the evenings, and meeting a club singer who wanted to know, why we were there and whether I wanted him to sing a song. And when I told him my husband died 6 weeks ago, he could hardly believe this could be real. So there was so much of that time that I felt my work was my extended family. And these colleagues and my team that I ran, I had the biggest team in the company. These people helped to keep me going. But at the same time, in hindsight, I'm sad that the company didn't recognize, maybe with a duty of care, that I'd been widowed and lost my husband of so many years. And that I probably, even though I was insisting I was okay, and I just took a week off after he died, they
Gosh.
probably should have insisted that I took some compassionate leave.
Mm.
Because if I had taken that compassionate leave, I might not have ended up in the situation I did, which was ultimately losing my job because of differences between myself and the CEO.
That's such a kind of a seismic coming together of so many different things, isn't it? As you said,
Yeah.
you're empty nesting, bird launching, as I know some people
That's lovely.
describe it, which is,
Yes,
you've
bird launching.
launching your little birds out into the world, all of these different parts of your self identity kind of fracturing and flying apart. What kind of helped you hold things together?
Part of it, I think, is that I am a very resilient person. I come from a very big family. where I had a lot of responsibility at a young age when my own parents divorced, and it was rather a difficult time for all the siblings involved. But
Mm.
I helped deliver one of my siblings at the age of 16. So I was
Gosh.
very much a coper and a strategist and a doer. And that role, I think, in my family has kind of transferred into my working life. I do like to try and I feel responsible for people. I care very deeply about what I do. And in those moments, in the last 6 months, at the beginning of this process of my job coming to an end, honestly can say I have never felt so isolated and so completely abandoned as I did then. It felt totally overwhelming that I was on my own. I'd lost him, I'd lost Brian, I'd then lost the trust and respect that I'd cherished so much from my CEO and boss. And it brought up all sorts of, you know, fears, paranoia almost about being invisible. And again, women of a certain age, you have this sense that, but I felt so good and so capable and so competent, and perhaps I'm not good and I'm not capable and not competent. And all of that opened up. So you're suddenly looking at this void in front of you and you're not sure if you can get across it. You know, how am I going to reconstruct the ladder to get to the other side? I used to be able to do this without having to think, even once about it, never mind twice or three times. So the answer is, and honestly, it's taken me probably until we're talking today to realize that the answer actually comes from me. It comes from inside me. I looked for validation from my previous boss because he gave it to me so well. He was very good at making me feel special and making me feel valued and decisive and important and knowledgeable and all the things, that a working mother craves to hear, that professionally she's bang on the money. And so I looked for that validation from someone who was also, I must say, super kind. He came to Brian's funeral. He left his family holiday to fly to be with us just on that day. He also helped to organize a wonderful trip to Switzerland in the first Christmas after Brian died, when none of us could face being here and
Mm.
what that meant, because Brian was a wonderful cook and was the heart of our Christmases. So this man surprised me by organizing for us to spend our Christmas at a family chalet in the mountains in Switzerland. And we were skiing for a week. And I felt so cared for and so supported, which I think is what made what came afterwards so hard to
Yeah,
cope with.
total 180 of that kind
Yeah,
of.
no, really, it really was. And look, I'm not for a moment saying it was easy for him, because dealing with anyone grieving the way I was, even though I think there were only a couple of meetings I had where I had to switch off my camera just to allow myself to cry for a bit and then I'd rejoin the meeting, I was mostly still managing a large international global team and dealing with other people's divorces and financial problems and trying to be the supportive. I'm a very inclusive and discursive leader. I'm not a command and control. I'm quite kind of empowering and liberating. And I honestly never thought, when I had that conversation and said, look, I'm really feeling unhappy, maybe I should leave. If I leave, will you support me? Will you give me a good reference? Will you help me to get through this? And I was given those assurances. So one bit of advice I would give to anyone who's listening is be really careful what you do when you're in a situation like that. I was obviously highly vulnerable and I didn't realize just how vulnerable I was. I felt, because I built a relationship of trust and I'm a very honest and transparent person, that I'd always have that trust and that I was safe to speak my fears and safe to say, maybe I should think about leaving. Wasn't looking for a pay rise, wasn't playing any games. I didn't expect it to do the 180 and turn on me, but it did. And that was really, really punishing. and really hard. And I know they say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, let's hope that's the case.
But in your case, you have taken that experience and made something fabulous from it.
Yeah.
I'm sure you would rather have not gone through that
Yeah.
turmoil, that upheaval, that emotional strain. But tell us a bit more about, yeah, why you
Yeah.
decided to launch a publishing company. And
Well, this I hope is the wonderful bit, and one of the reasons why I felt having this conversation together was so important, because I'm not foolish. I know there will be other boulders in my road during, the rest of my career and life, but when it felt as it did back then in the end of summer last year, that a door was slamming closed in my face, and I was having to worry because financially I'm in a situation where I didn't have life insurance, or Brian didn't have any savings to leave. So it was me and what I can do financially to support my three kids through university. And that felt quite huge to have to
mm,
handle. So I immediately thought, right, I need to use my network. I need to talk to people. I need to either find another job, or I need to find good consultancy work. And can't afford, as people were saying, take some time off, take a break. And I was thinking, I can't, I have to do this. So I used my network and I reached out, and through huge good luck and good fortune, I connected with some people who belong to a professional body that I also belong to. And we talked, and initially, I was offering consultancy on their own publishing companies, and said, I gave them a proposal. This is what I can do. This is what I think I can bring to your company. And that's the basis on which we first talked. But then we met. I went into their offices in London. And after that meeting, they came back and said, listen, we've got a proposition for you. How would you feel about co-launching and co-owning a new publishing company that will sit in this suite of other imprints we've got, but you will have equity and you will have co-ownership and be a director, but you won't have to personally put up the finances, because of course I'd always thought about having my own publishing company because I've got all the skills and all the experience, but I knew I would have to go to the bank and get a loan. And that was really scary after
mm,
Brian died. I didn't want to take on any debts, it was just too much. So these partners have come forward, and we are now in partnership together. And we have now co launched Riverlight Press, which I am so happy about post London Book Fair. This is
mhm.
talking about this new press and working in partnership with my new business partners and publishing colleagues. I feel, just as we enter spring and the sun is shining, that a door closed but a set of bifolds has opened up in its place.
It's a
And
whole new world.
honestly, yeah, it really is. And it's taken me some months to adjust out of the corporate structure I was in into the wonderful small publisher I'm now part of. But it really feels like home. It really feels like, particularly in my business partner, who is the on the ground sort of hands-on person, I found a really perfect co-publisher and co-director, because both of us have different but really complementary skills, and different but very complementary personalities and ways of going about our work. So I look to her for the things that she can bring to me, and I hope likewise she is also looking at me and realizing what things Lucy does quite well. So we had a wonderful London Book Fair. I was also invited to speak on a panel on the future of jobs in publishing now that we are faced with AI.
Mm,
That also felt incredibly empowering, because the backwash from that has been lots of people coming forward wanting to engage more with me and with my new publishing company, because they're seeing me as a voice, somebody with authority and expertise. So the old Lucy was there at London, but she was a new Lucy.
The phoenix from the flames.
The phoenix from the flames. And I raised my kids listening to lots of music. And Brian was oh my goodness, such an expert on different music genres, knows more about music than I ever will. But one of the things we allowed them to watch when they were little were the original Disney Fantasia and the Fantasia 2000, and we took them to the Royal Albert Hall to see it orchestrated with the film being shown. And there's a piece in the Fantasia 2000 which is Stravinsky's Firebird Suite, and it's set to a cartoon that shows the kind of the green lady, the spirit of the forest, kind of supreme, and then there is a volcano, and the volcano kind of takes out and wipes away all life and reduces everything to ash, and she shrinks down into a tiny little seed beneath the ground. And then, of course, as we know, after lava has flowed and rich volcanic deposits appear, new life begins to spring up. And so, to the wonderful Firebird music, you see her resurgence as she soars into the sky and everything comes into bloom. And you see a stag that's run from the flames standing majestically at the end. This is when I get
So
quite emotional.
that's your theme tune now,
Absolutely.
Lucy.
I watched it again this morning, and my kids loved that particular animation. But now I see in this little green spirit that in the end brings life back and literally comes from the ashes. That's how I feel. I can do this. I'm doing
Mm,
it. I'm doing it now.
you
I'm
are.
living. It's a different life than the one I thought I'd be living at 55, without Brian. I'm single, haven't been single since I was 16, I think. So I'm finding out about me again. And I'm doing this wonderful stuff with Riverlight and with Aurora Metro, the company behind Riverlight. And I feel blessed. I really do feel blessed.
What's your advice, Lucy, if you want to call it advice, for somebody who's feeling whether they've just lost somebody or they're grieving a redundancy, particularly sort of dark night of the soul? What kind of words would you have to share with them?
Honestly, the words that I think my mother, who's a mother of 11, so she knows what she's
She's just
talking
had her
about.
80th birthday. I know.
Is
Amazing
just
woman.
has indeed, yes. She would always say this, and she did say it to me: the darkest night even will have the dawn break and the sun will shine again. And look, there were a couple of moments that just a handful of people know about where I was about as low as I could go. I couldn't stop crying.
Mm,
I had just one moment, a very brief moment, where I had some intrusive thoughts that I've never had before and hope to never have again. And I honestly think I'd hit the lowest point at that moment when I began to have those intrusive thoughts. What I would say to other people is it does change, it does start to get better. A bit like that animation in the Disney film. Little by little, the green shoots do start to reappear. And doesn't mean there aren't going to be bad days or
mm,
hard moments, but increasingly, you begin to see that there are more moments when, in my new life now, I've done 3 live poetry stand up evenings. Never done that before, and I've absolutely loved them. I've had so much positive feedback from the audience and people attending. I've realized it's something I do quite well, something I enjoy. I threw myself into theatre. I did last year in Oxford here at the Playhouse, The Importance of Being Earnest, where I was Lady Bracknell. And that was just amazing. It's an iconic role in an iconic play. And I did that, what, 5, 6 months after losing Brian, because he said before he died, "You will go on, Lucy. You will live and you will love again and you will be loved." Now, that last part I haven't achieved because I've tried, I've had a few dates. It hasn't felt right, or I haven't felt ready or right, but I know it will come. I know eventually it will. So when you feel, as I did, that my world is just closing down and I'm losing sight of the person I am. You're not, because that person is in you. And I had to learn, look for the affirmation or the sense of praise that you got from others. Look for it in you, because it's there. And Brian said, you won't be able to hear my voice anymore, but you can still talk to me. And you know how I would have answered. And he's right. I go for a walk now with the dog. Another thing I got, the dog I got after he died. And I talk to my dog and I talk to the landscape. And I imagine Brian alongside me as he was for so many walks. And I can hear what he'd say. I can hear his voice. I can hear it in here in my head, even though I can't see him and hear him. So don't stop hoping that things will begin to change, that they will pivot back, or they'll pivot in a slightly different way, but it's going to be okay. And it is going to be okay, not just for me, but for others who've had awful life changing events that feel insurmountably unbearable at the time. You can do it. You've got this.
Lucy, it's been very, very emotional listening to your story. Thank you so much for sharing it.
Thank
It's,
you.
I hope if anyone's listening, I mean, if you're going through a very, very difficult time, I hope Lucy sharing her story and that beautiful kind of imagery has given you, that little green flicker to kind of to focus on and to build on that. And yeah, it's a lovely story, and it's been a pleasure getting to know you just sort of through this interview and chatting to you before. And I'm sure Brian is incredibly proud of what you've achieved over the last
I hope so.
Short while.
Yeah, I really hope so. I like to think so.
Thank you, Lucy. It's been a real pleasure.
Not at all.
Thanks for listening to the Middling Along podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please go and leave us a review over at Apple Podcasts. You can check out the full back catalogue of all our episodes over at midlingalong.com. You can also find out more about my work as a coach. Go to www.thetripleshift.org.